Dear colleagues, dear guests, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce you today our keynote speaker, Dr. SELIN SAYEK BÖKE, a prominent economist and a politician from Turkey. Her full biography of success requires and deserves a long introduction, but I believe if the star is big and bright, then introduction can be short. So I would like to present her to you today by mentioning briefly about her biography and including some testimonies. Well, Dr. Böke was the speaker and the vice chair responsible for economic policy of the Republican People's Party, a social democratic party and a main opposition party in Turkey, between 2014 and 2017. And she has elected a member of the Turkish parliament in 2015 general elections. Dr. Böke received her master's and PhD degrees in economics from Duke University. She has worked as a consultant at the World Bank and in economics at the IMF. She worked as an assistant professor at Bentley College and visiting professor at Georgetown University prior to joining the Department of Economics at Kent University in 2003. Dr. Böke has authored and co-authored several publications on many economic issues, but I will neither read the list of her publications nor the awards she has received from very prestigious institutions. But I will suffice to only mention two awards she has received. One is Excellent Award in Global Economic Affairs, granted by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. And the second one is the Distinguished Teaching Award, granted by Kent University. Actually, Dr. Böke was the darling of her students. Here is one of her students' words. She makes you wake up early in the morning and keenly wish to go to the school. It's obvious her classes was at the early mornings. Anyhow, her lectures are so much fun, you feel that even you love economics. Here is another one. A teacher who has managed to become an inspiration to her students, which I wish was said for me too. Well, the following question asked by Dr. Böke in one of her exams caught my attention. It was a quite interesting question. The question was, why doesn't fish think? Well, I think, if I'm not wrong, the simple and the short answer of this question is fish doesn't think because fish knows everything.
That's a Gorambrago.
Of course, Dr. Böke's fish can be a politician or a political consultant or even an academician, maybe all of them. Of course, we will ask her to give us a right answer during one of our coffee breaks. Well, with the special invitation of the Social Democrat leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu in 2014, Dr. Böke pursued a successful career in political life as in her academic career. She is the first female politician has managed to become the spokesperson of a party throughout Turkey's political history. One of her politician colleagues described her as, she has become a special color in grey politics with her sincerity, warmth, and positive energy. Dr. BÖKE makes the impression of a politician profile who is firmly attached to her contemporary social democratic principles and to the ideals of democracy, freedom, and equality. She continued this attitude decisively in the party, struggling against decisions and actions that she did not approve, and finally showed the courage to step down from her senior management position at the party. I said courage because in Turkey it is not a common practice to resign from senior political post because there is a high risk to be a past tense soon in politics. However, she succeeded to be elected to the party assembly by collecting second highest vote. It was 500 candidates for 60 seats during the party convention conducted only last month. Nevertheless, the resignation of duties has upset those, including myself, to see her as an important and valuable asset for party management. However, one person was very happy and delighted from her resignation. And this person is her 4-year-old son, Axel. One time, Axel was so upset to her mother, who can come home occasionally, that he trapped her to the couch with Dutch tape and gave her an ultimatum by telling her that she cannot go to anywhere ever again. Well, it seems there must be a peace at home these days because Dr. BÖKE is with us today. So please join me to welcome her.
Some steps are more difficult than others.
Especially in politics.
Yeah, politics is easier than this part.
Can I hold your...
So I can get rid of these and act as if I don't need them. Well, I've been sufficiently embarrassed with the introduction and blushed enough that I assume I won't have to blush more during the talk. Let me start by thanking you for this very honoring and somewhat humbling introduction. And yes, there was some negotiation at home for me to come here, but I was successful in negotiating. So the purpose is to continue negotiating not only at home in its smallest sense, but also continue negotiating in my home country to ensure that we actually find the right path in democracy, not just in its social democratic values, which I deeply care for, but in its very basic democracy quest. So let me start by saying how honored I am to be here, not only as a politician who cares for an improvement in the daily lives of her own home country, but also as a politician who deeply cares to understand how much of what's going on internally has a global component to it, and how much of the solution actually lies in ensuring that we have an international perspective to ensuring that we resolve much of these problems that have huge commonalities. So my speech is going to be about Turkey. To me, Turkey is my home country, right? So it's my home. It's what makes me to the greatest degree, in a sense. But I think it's also a very unique case because Turkey stands at the straddles of the East and the West. It's a country that shares borders with the East and the West, and takes great pride in the fact that it's a location, a geography, where very different cultures actually meet. And very different cultures have actually coexisted for thousands of years in this piece of land. So it's a country with amazing diversity, amazing heterogeneity, but at the end of the day, it's a country. So these heterogeneities have found a way to live together and indeed form a past and hopefully a future together. So this heterogeneity and diversity and geographic location clearly bears its risks of geopolitical risks that we are now very much well aware of, and which we have been aware of in the past as well. However, the focus for me has always been the amazing positives that come out of that diversity, where different cultures are able to meet. Having said that, however, there is huge concern that's alarming us through significant surveys that have come out recently. So I'm going to start by sharing with you some statistics from a recent survey on political polarization in Turkey. The survey was carried out by BÖKE University, a university in Istanbul, a center for migration research. So I'm just going to read some of the statistics, which will give us a picture of how such a diverse society actually can easily become polarized. So the number or share of people responding to the survey who said, "I would not like to do business with individuals who have voted for different political parties," is 74%. So 3/4 of the society does not want to interact economically with people who have different political affiliations. The second question was, "I would not like my daughter to get married with individuals who have voted for different political parties." And the respondents, 79% of the respondents said this is what they would care for. So 80% of the society, 4 out of every 5 people, actually said they do not want a possible future with people who have different political affiliations. And 68% of the public said they would not want their children to have play dates with kids from families who have different political affiliations, suggestive that the future actually cannot be built together around different political views. And finally, 70% of the society said they would not like to be neighbors with people who have different political affiliations. Now, I guess this clearly is suggestive of a huge political polarization. A political polarization that has amazing implications on how the economy will work, on how our future generations will mingle, and how socially this diversity that we take great pride in can actually carry on into the near future as well as possibly the longer term. So in a sense, the society is opting to form ghettos that are formulated around political views rather than values and common issues that we care about. Now, this very stark data actually suggests that polarization has now been minimized into one that has sheerly a political dimension. So a polarization that's not driven just by identities, but where among those identities, political affiliation has become the core defining factor of an identity of an individual. Now, this in itself has its negatives attached to it, but I think it also has a huge positive in it, that if identities that can be changed, you're born into an ethnic identity which you cannot change. You might have a religious belief that you might not want to change. However, political views among all these identity characteristics are possibly one that bears the possibility of changing. So in this grim picture, there is some hope that the polarization that's heavily driven by political affiliations might actually be broken up. However, it's not just these surveys that suggest that we have amazing political polarization ongoing. Indeed, the electoral behavior is also very suggestive of a sticky choice that we're seeing from the electorate. The voting behavior seems to be very stable, and it seems to be heavily driven by these identities that I have predefined. there are clearly structural reasons for why people are more attached to their identities within this geography than in other places. However, it seems among these identities that I'm going to mention and structural issues, political affiliation is now a third dimension that we're going to have to tackle in the near future. Now, the structural issues that have been prevalent in the country that have led to an identity-based politics and allowed for a base for polarization has been, one, an issue of ethnic origin, which in this very nationalistic wave of politics that we're observing globally has allowed grounds for this to pick up in the country. The existence of the Kurdish issue and this becoming a dimension of polarizing and indeed playing into the nationalistic sentiments has led to parties representing specific ethnic identities within the political spectrum. The second issue, the structural issue that has been prevalent for quite some time has been the religious beliefs and the tensions that lie around versus a religion. And this also has led to political parties actually representing identities around secularism versus religious beliefs, and has been another, if you wish, breaking up point within the political spectrum. And you can see these clearly in the four parties that are represented within the parliament and identify which identities are represented dominantly in which political party. Now, having said that, however, unfortunately a third dimension seems to have popped up beyond these structural issues, where a strong communication from the powerful, who have been holding power for the past 16 years in the country, has indeed added to what we might call personal characteristics, the choice of politics. So people are now predefined by the vote that they give, not by why they chose to give the vote, or which issues they think is represented in a political party. So per se, it's a very shallow definition of what a political party would carry. Now this is evident in the survey as well, so I'd like to share with you why I believe that personal characteristics now include your political vote. When people were asked to define the supporters of their political party, they said they felt close to these people because they were working for the benefit of the country. And so the sentiment was 92% of the people felt close to those who voted for the same party because they were working for the common goal of the benefit of the country. Now, while this in itself might have some values in it, the other definitions were very much about personal traits. They labeled these people as honorable by 91%, as patriotic by 90%, as smart by 84%, as generous by 83%, as an open-minded person by 82%. So this is to suggest your vote starts labeling how smart you are, how generous you are, how open-minded you are, and how patriotic you are. Now we observe a similar mirror image from those who, an evaluation of those people who have voted for other political parties. Now, these people who have voted for other political parties are viewed as a threat to the country. So this starts creating the definition of the enemy, like within the country. So people thought by 86% that those who voted for other parties were not thinking of the benefit of the country. 83% of the people thought those who voted for other parties were cruel people. And 84% of the people thought those people who voted for other parties were two-sided. They were not sincere. They were bigoted. They were arrogant. And they were selfish. So political affiliation starts getting attached to ideas of personal characteristic where an enemy starts being defined through political preferences. Now this is to say, a very clear case study of political polarization is very much predefined in our geography, right? So political polarization starts creating an enemy internally, and this enemy has to be gotten rid of because they are not the real people anymore. Now, we observe, therefore, that the critical question is, how is it that the political identities that we bear have become a core part of our own personal characteristic? What actually allowed this to build up within a country that has amazing diversity, has had its problems, but also has had the bare minimum necessities of a democracy throughout its Republican history? So the question is, what is it that they did to actually allow for this political polarization to be so ingrained, where we start seeing each other as enemies, we start seeing our nationhood as including bad people? Now, this question, therefore, is, how evasive, what happens when such, or it leads to the next question of, then what happens? If you have so much political polarization, what is it that we should expect at the end of this road? What good can come out of it? Clearly none, right? And we're already experiencing the amazing negatives of such political polarization in a country that actually has many problems to deal with, both locally, regionally, and as a contributor to the global society. And this is, I think, the latter part of the speech, is to convince you that actually you should care about what's going on in Turkey, even though it might not be on your radar screen, even though it might not be a country near to you geographically, or maybe near to your heart. But what happens there will not remain there. What happens there has a huge global part to it, and what happens there will have huge global spillovers that have to be controlled much earlier than actually these spillovers start being realized. We all need a healthy democracy. We all need the sense of comfort and confidence rather than the sense of fear and mistrust. And we all know that political polarization heavily feeds into the feelings of fear and mistrust, and fear and mistrust can become very authoritarian at the end of the day. And we all know such authoritarianship never remains within its own geographic boundaries. It finds ways out of the country. It finds ways into the global system. Therefore, the question is, how can we ensure that we will be able to break up this political polarization? Well, to find the answer, we have to identify how actually that political polarization did indeed build up. Clearly in Turkey, the experience has been one of a deliberate political choice by the ruling party. The ruling party has decided strongly to pursue a politics that's very much summarized through a divide and conquer politics. So the framework and the strategy had several legs. First, you cripple down the democratic space. You get rid of any checks and balances, any separation of power, any rule of law, which therefore starts hindering the civil society and those who actually care to speak of trust as an amazing social capital that we all need to ensure that our differences can coexist. And this crippling down of the democratic space clearly means that the society starts being divided into those who are us and those who are against us. So the second step of the strategy, or the second leg, is to build an exclusive system through that breakup of the democracy, where dissidents are excluded from the bureaucracy, from the economy, from the procurements, from the politics, and pretty much by far from the society. The third leg of the strategy, to actually operationalize these principles that are set out in the strategy, is to create an embedded media. A media that will be your voice to ensure that those who are us can be predefined and through repetitive media exposure. And the fourth leg of the strategy is one where the heavy inequalities that have happened on account of both local and global events are actually instrumentalized as factors that will allow for polarization to build up, where the blame is actually not put on the true cause of those inequalities, but rather the inequalities are used as an opportunity to create the mistrust and the fear, where the other side is creating that inequality, where the definition of other becomes extremely vague and very unclear. And finally, the process is one where a continuous political scapegoating activity continues. Each and every one of us tastes it during their political life, during their social life, where you become the scapegoat for calling out for democracy, for calling out for a unison and unifying theme, where people actually care to share very much universal human right values. So what we observed in this political scapegoating indeed were stages, which we experienced throughout the 16 years. I'm going to quickly summarize it. It's not easy to go through a 16-year history. But the first stage was where the structural, if you wish, tension between the secularism and the religious beliefs dimension, if you wish, was a scapegoating of the secular bureaucracy. They were to be blamed for the problems of the country. Therefore, we had to get rid of them. So the first attack was one where religious sentiments were heavily instigated through political campaigns, and where your identity on your religious sentiments and your beliefs actually became the main core of the political vote that you gave. The second stage was scapegoating the progressives within the society. These were people who would actually be willing to discuss these structural problems and were willing to figure out a common outcome and a common roadmap to resolving many of these issues. However, scapegoating the progressives meant that you could actually create further tensions on these resolvable issues. And at the third stage, external forces were scapegoated, which I know many of you have been reading or maybe personally experiencing, where other countries were to be blamed for anything that would happen, and as well as the ethnic identities within the country. So instigating nationalistic sentiments. The other is other countries. The other is the ethnic identities that the country does not wish to carry or bear within. So at this stage, the problem therefore has an international dimension that goes beyond the domestic borders and that goes beyond those of us who are heavily suffocated within the national borders. So this brings me to the question of, well, if it's the case that stage by stage, this political polarization was built through a very deliberate strategy of dividing and conquering through the tensions that exist within the society, as well as with the society and other nation states, this buildup did create, within the process, an erosion of democratic values. So the political polarization itself was just a mean for an end that would allow for the authoritarian system to be built up. You polarize. Throughout that polarization, you use instruments to indeed break up your democratic values, and as those breakup of democratic values are internalized by the larger public, it becomes easier to build up your own authoritarian system. And that's what we are now experiencing. That's the stage we are now experiencing within Turkey. This, I do not speak just out of personal experience. Clearly, I do have my personal experience to share with you. But again, I think it's, especially among political consultants, it's fair to speak of these through data and through the survey. Let me share with you a part that within that polarization survey asks people what they think about democratic values. 43%, so almost half of the public says, I don't agree that political party supporters from other parties should be able to make a press release in my city. Half the public does not want to hear the voice of what they think is the enemy and the other. While we all know it's not an other, it's not an enemy, it's indeed an integral part of that democratic force. Again, 44% of the public doesn't agree that political party supporters from other parties should be able to hold a meeting in the place or city I live in. So we don't want to hear them, we don't want them to convene. 46% of the people think that people from other political parties should not be able to hold demonstrations in the place or city that I live in. And this goes on, right? They don't want them to receive educations which responds to their needs in this city. They don't want them to be nominated for deputyship or mayorship, for political duties within their own city. And they think, a third of the public thinks, that phones of members of this other group can be listened to and recorded for security reasons. Now, this is to suggest this strategy that has been built up around a divide and conquer politics, that has heavily polarized us around our political views, has succeeded in ensuring that people now see each other through this political lens and nothing beyond, and the enemy is there. Now, clearly, we have to change this game. And we have to change this game before authoritarianism actually is further ingrained into the society. Now, what I just expressed here in a very summarized version does have a global component to it, and we heard this throughout the presentations yesterday. What Turkey is experiencing does have a very Turkish component to it. Right? Clearly, we have a political figure and its politics. However, that strategy has succeeded not only because of that strategy, but because there is also a global wave of nationalistic sentiments, a global wave that is pushing the world toward less democracy and further authoritarianism. I know you're experiencing this in different stages and levels here in the UK. Many of you are experiencing it in the US. The continental Europe has similar forces, maybe to different degrees, where the rule of law still protects some of the democratic values. However, the question, therefore, is still common. Right? We all have to figure out why we are experiencing this wave, beyond our own personal experiences. And here, I think, the two camps that we're observing seems to be, one, a comfort zone for the politician, where we argue, it's not us. We didn't do anything wrong. It's the structure that's creating this polarization. And that structure is defined through globalization, which was an exogenous process. We had nothing to do with it. It happened. It created inequalities. Therefore, it's a natural outcome to see the polarization. This allows an amazing comfort zone for us politicians, right? It wasn't us. It was a globalization that overtook us, which I strongly disagree with. Or we take the comfort in arguing that the production schemes have changed. It's the economy that has changed. And this has created a post-industrial period, which has changed the class structures. And indeed, it has also contributed to how we define ourselves, where we now view ourselves as multidimensional in our identity. And we care to speak of those different identities. So we're not as attached to a single identity as we used to be. Therefore, tensions have increased. It's not us, the politicians, who have made the political or policy choice, but it's the natural outcome of an exogenous event that we did not control, which I strongly disagree with. So the first camp would argue it's a structural issue, very deterministic. We can't change it. It happens. We just deal with the outcome. The second alternative is to take responsibility and realize that both globalization and the post-industrial system that we are living through is indeed an outcome of the policy choices that we made. And these policy choices, in their very broadest maybe definition, were the neoliberal economic policies, which not only overtook the right-wing politics, but also overtook the left-wing politics, where neoliberalism was accepted as a given, and we accepted to play into the rules of the games that were set by that neoliberal system, rather than arguing that the neoliberal system was indeed the cause, by choice, of the experience of inequality, both economically and socially. Now, if we agree that the cause was driven by a policy choice and it was endogenous, then the solution lies in changing those policies. It lies in convincing the larger public that the inequalities and the fear and mistrust that are driven and triggered through those inequalities can be resolved by changing the system, because those inequalities are not the fate that you have to experience. They're not God-given. They can be changed with different policies, and politicians are responsible for changing those policies. So the quest should not be just a representation by the non-elites, but we should trigger the quest to become one of demanding certain issues to be resolved and certain values to be ingrained into the solution of those issues. Because unless we do that, the natural outcome is one where especially the far right starts creating scapegoats. It's the immigrants. It's easier than explaining that it's indeed the wrong policy choices. Or it's a Euroscepticism. We were never Europe. Whereas we all know Europe was a huge peace process that we all benefited from globally, not only within Europe. But it's easy to say, I'm skeptic of Europe, let's get rid of it. It's easier than explaining why we have our inequalities and how these inequalities can be resolved through a series of policy changes. Or it's easier to say it's the political elites, and I'm not one of them. So unless we fill up that void by expressing the true policy changes we need. And we do this with a confident manner through maybe a criticism of our past mistakes, then they're going to fill up that void politically through further polarization, and the polarization is going to happen through triggers of fear and mistrust, and I just showed you where that can carry to in a country where this has been experienced for the past 16 years. This is the end of the road now. And it means less democracy for all of us and more authoritarianism for the world. So I think the choice is clear. Right? We all need to stick to what I would call the universal left values, not through a leftist policy, but by understanding that an egalitarian system will resolve inequalities. How we're going to do it, we might have different policy options, but we will have the democratic grounds to discuss those. Or a free world. We might not know how to do it yet, but at least we'll have the objective of building that free world, a universal left value that we should deeply hang on to. So we need a new progressive social contract in a way that actually is driven through policy sets that we should formulate together and draft together. So this is our quest, right? Going back to my homeland. As a politician who today represents the main opposition and hopefully in the near future will represent the ruling party, our quest, and especially my quest, is to ensure that we actually push for these progressive values. That we don't cave into the polarization, we don't cave into the fear, we don't cave into the mistrust that's created, and we do not fear to be scapegoated by that very polarizing politics. It necessitates courage, it necessitates persistence, and it necessitates a belief that this is doable. So I think we need a new politics, clearly, to ensure that we overcome this amazing wave of negatives. Now, to end this very bright conversation, maybe it might be worth triggering. I have no doubt we're going to be able to do this, right? Otherwise, I would prefer spending my time with my 2 kids who deeply miss me, and I know this is not a feeling that's specific to me. We all share our life with our loved ones, and we give up that time to ensure that we actually have a future to share those times that we care to share in. But let me end the speech by actually saying, yes, this is maybe a Turkey story, but believe me, what happens in Turkey is actually a global story. At the end of the day, we're all one. So let me remind you of how what's happening there has an globally, not just through foreign relations, but through what it's setting up as an example in a region that bears amazing risks, right? And a country that has been the regional leader in ensuring peace in a very diverse part of the world. So the question is, should you care about another country demolishing its democracy? Should you care about another country becoming authoritarian? Does it matter to you? Well, it does. Not just because we share a humanitarian or a very human commonality, but it also matters economically. At the end of the day, less democracy in the world is going to be less welfare, is going to mean less to share in the future in both economic and social cases. Now, here I think those of us who care for democracy actually